It was late on the evening of August 24th, 2019, in Aurora, Colorado. The kind of summer night when the streets fall eerily quiet, with only the occasional hum of cars rolling by or the distant bark of a dog breaking the silence. On that night, 23-year-old Elijah McClain was walking home from a local convenience store. He had bought a few things: iced tea, some snacks, nothing unusual, nothing alarming. He wasn't causing trouble, wasn't shouting, wasn't doing anything suspicious. He was simply walking home. But Elijah was different, not in a dangerous way, in a unique way. He was often described by those who knew him as gentle, soft-spoken, and even quirky. He liked to keep to himself, sometimes dancing to music in his head as he walked. That night, as he moved down the sidewalk, he wore a ski mask, not to conceal a crime, but because he often felt cold due to anemia. To him, it was normal. To others, it might have looked unusual. And in the world we live in, unusual can sometimes be fatal. Around 10:30 p.m., someone made a 911 call. The caller said they saw a man who looked sketchy. He wasn't doing anything violent, wasn't holding a weapon, wasn't threatening anyone. He was just walking. But in America, sometimes just walking while being different or while being black is enough to bring suspicion. Moments later, 3 police officers were dispatched, and within the hour, Elijah McClain would be fighting for his life. Elijah wasn't a criminal. He wasn't violent. He wasn't a threat to anyone. In fact, he was the exact opposite of the kind of person society often fears. Friends, family, and even strangers remembered him as gentle, kind-hearted, and almost too good for this world. He was a massage therapist, a job he loved because it allowed him to bring comfort to people. Co-workers said he would often work extra hours just to make clients feel better. But what really defined him was his love for music. Elijah played the violin. He would often bring it to animal shelters, sitting down in front of cages filled with lonely cats and dogs. And he would play. The music soothed them. The animals, restless, anxious, sometimes traumatized, would calm in his presence. That was the effect Elijah had. He was a healer, even to those who couldn't speak. He was also shy, reserved, and quirky in ways that made him endearing. He would wear a ski mask even in warmer weather because of his anemia. He was a vegetarian, always careful about what he ate. He didn't drink, didn't do drugs. Elijah wasn't interested in partying or chasing trends. He lived in his own world, a softer world, where music, compassion, and kindness mattered more than anything else. One of the most haunting things about Elijah McClain is how much he tried to avoid conflict. Friends described him as someone who would apologize to strangers if they bumped into him. He hated confrontation, hated violence, and hated the idea of making others uncomfortable. And yet, on that August night, confrontation came for him, and he could not avoid it. The 911 call that changed everything was short but devastating. A man phoned in to report someone he thought looked suspicious. He described Elijah as a sketchy guy, waving his arms, wearing a mask. But the caller admitted something important. He didn't think the man was armed, and he didn't think he was dangerous. It was a vague description of someone doing nothing illegal, but was enough to send officers racing to the scene. Imagine being Elijah that night, walking home, music in your head, tea in your hand, maybe planning what you'd eat when you got back. You don't know that someone has called the police on you. You don't know that within minutes, strangers with badges and weapons will surround you. That moment, the calm before the storm, is chilling because you can almost feel Elijah's innocence colliding with what's about to happen. When the officers arrived, they spotted Elijah and immediately moved in. What happened next has been dissected, replayed, and debated ever since. The officers claimed Elijah resisted, that he was acting strangely. But body camera footage tells a different story. Elijah was confused, caught off guard, and above all, terrified. And here's the heartbreaking truth. Elijah wasn't a fighter. He wasn't someone who lashed out. He wasn't someone who would hurt anyone. Instead, he begged. He pleaded. Over and over, Elijah McClain's voice can be heard saying things like, "I'm an introvert. I'm different. I don't do stuff like that. I'm just going home. I'm sorry. I don't have a gun. I don't do that stuff." And then, the most haunting words of all, I can't breathe. Please stop. Elijah's desperate words echo through the recordings, but they didn't stop the officers. They placed him in a carotid hold, a controversial chokehold that restricts blood flow to the brain. Elijah fainted, then regained consciousness. He vomited, begged for air, and cried out that he didn't want to die. By the time paramedics arrived, Elijah was already weak, gasping, fading. Instead of carefully assessing the situation, they made a decision that would seal his fate. They injected him with ketamine, a powerful sedative. For someone Elijah's size, the dosage was dangerously high. His body couldn't handle it. Within minutes, Elijah's pulse slowed, and he went into cardiac arrest. He was rushed to the hospital, placed on life support. A few days later, his family made the unbearable decision. Elijah McClain was gone. What happened on that dark Aurora street? Was this police brutality? An unjust stop that escalated into deadly force? Was it medical neglect? Paramedics carelessly dosing a man already fighting for breath? Or was it both? Elijah McClain's death is not just a story about one man. It's a story about suspicion, about race, about the way innocence can be mistaken for guilt in a split second. It's about how a kind, gentle soul, a violinist who played music for lonely animals, could end up dead because someone thought he looked sketchy. And yet, the official reports in the beginning told a different story. Investigators suggested this was a tragedy, yes, but not necessarily a crime. They called it a random act, almost as if Elijah's death was just bad luck. But as the weeks went on, secrets began to unravel. Conflicting medical reports, body cam footage that contradicted police statements, autopsy findings that left more questions than answers. And in the middle of it all, a family demanding justice, a community outraged, and a country asking the question, was Elijah McClain killed by the system meant to protect him? As the officers pulled Elijah's arms, tried to force him to ground, his pleas grew louder. "I'm an introvert," he said. "I'm just different. That's all." His words were heartbreaking in their simplicity. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He wasn't lashing out. He was trying to explain himself, as if his uniqueness was enough to justify why he looked suspicious. But to the officers, Elijah's resistance, twisting, panicking, pleading, looked like non-compliance. They called it fighting back. To Elijah, it was survival. He begged them to stop touching him. He told them he couldn't breathe. He vomited into a ski mask. But the grip didn't loosen. At one point, Officer Woodyard applied a carotid control hold, a controversial maneuver that cuts off blood flow to the brain. Elijah's voice faltered. His body grew limp. For a moment, he lost consciousness. When he came to, his words were disoriented, desperate. "I can't breathe. I don't even kill flies. I don't eat meat. I don't judge people. I don't judge people who eat meat." Those words, rambling, scattered, but profoundly human, painted a portrait of a man trying to reason with forces that refused to listen. It was as if Elijah was pleading not just for his life, but for recognition of his humanity. But the officers continued to restrain him. When paramedics arrived, they found Elijah already pinned to ground, gasping for air, surrounded by officers. Instead of questioning the necessity of the restraint, they prepared to sedate him. The diagnosis they gave on the spot was excited delirium. This controversial term is often used by police and emergency responders to justify extreme measures. It describes a state where a person is allegedly so agitated and uncontrollable that they pose a danger to themselves or others. But medical experts have long disputed its legitimacy, pointing out that it is often applied disproportionately to black men in police custody. Without running tests, without taking his vitals, the paramedics decided to inject Elijah with ketamine, a powerful sedative. Elijah weighed about 140 pounds. The standard dosage of ketamine for someone his size would have been far lower than what he received. Instead, paramedics injected him with 500 milligrams, a dose appropriate for someone much heavier. Within minutes, Elijah's body shut down. His pulse slowed, his breathing grew faint, and then his heart stopped. On the body camera audio, the silence after the injection is haunting. The chaos of the struggle gave way to eerie stillness. Elijah was no longer moving. As officers and paramedics hovered over him, One officer's camera captured his final whispers before he lost consciousness completely. "Tell my mom I love her." Those words hang in the air like a ghost. A farewell no one expected him to give that night. Elijah was rushed to the hospital, unresponsive. For days, machines kept him alive, but doctors could not reverse the damage. His brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. On August 30th, 2019, Elijah McClain was declared brain dead. His family faced an unbearable choice: to remove him from life support. With tears, prayers, and grief no words to describe, they let him go. He was only 23. In the immediate aftermath, the narrative leaned in favor of the police and paramedics. The officers claimed Elijah had resisted arrest. The paramedics claimed he showed signs of excited delirium. The initial autopsy was inconclusive, stating the cause of death could not be determined. This finding would haunt the case for months, allowing officials to argue there was no clear evidence of criminal wrongdoing. The district attorney at the time declined to press charges. For many in the community, it looked like another case of a black man dying at the hands of authority, with no accountability. If Elijah wasn't armed, if the 911 caller admitted he didn't think Elijah was dangerous, if Elijah repeatedly said he couldn't breathe, then why was deadly force used at all? Why was a sedative injected into his body without proper medical evaluation? And above all, would Elijah McClain still be alive if he hadn't been a young black man wearing a mask on a summer night? At first, Elijah's case didn't make national headlines. It was quietly filed away as an unfortunate, unexplained tragedy, but his family refused to let his name be forgotten. And then, in 2020, following the killing of George Floyd, Elijah's story resurfaced. Protesters carried his picture. Musicians played violins in his honor at candlelight vigils. And suddenly, the world wanted answers. The case was reopened. Independent investigators reviewed the evidence, and what they found cast doubt on everything the police and paramedics had claimed. But that's a story for the next chapter. The night Elijah McClain died wasn't just a tragedy. It was the start of a battle for truth. Police said he resisted. Paramedics said he had excited delirium. But Elijah's final words tell a different story. A story of fear, of confusion, of a young man who wanted only to go home. After Elijah McClain's death on August 30th, 2019, a strange quiet fell over Aurora, Colorado. To the outside world, the case seemed like a tragic accident. A young man, an unusual encounter, and an unexpected death. But to those who knew Elijah, the silence was deafening. His family couldn't accept it. Friends refused to let his story fade. Something about the official narrative didn't make sense. Elijah was gentle. He was shy. He was harmless. How could this gentle violinist, this young healer who played for lonely animals, be described as violent or dangerous? The first autopsy, performed by the Aurora Police Department's contracted medical examiner, concluded that Elijah's death was inconclusive. It stated he had died from causes undetermined, without specifying whether carotid hold, ketamine injection, or underlying health conditions were the primary factor. This conclusion sparked confusion. Medical experts reviewing the case noted that the dosage of ketamine alone was enough to endanger a man of Elijah's size. Add to that the physical stress from the restraint, the chokehold, and the trauma, and it was clear that multiple factors contributed to his death. Yet, for months, the case went largely uninvestigated. No charges were filed. No immediate accountability. Friends and neighbors began asking questions. Vigils were held in Elijah's honor. Social media accounts began sharing his story, emphasizing his kindness, his violin, his love for animals. Photos of him smiling, playing the violin, or walking calmly in a ski mask began circulating widely. People were shocked. How could a man like this meet such a violent end for simply existing? But local authorities remained tight-lipped. Statements were carefully worded. The police maintained that Elijah's death was tragic but not criminal, and paramedics defended their ketamine dosage as standard procedure for excited delirium. To outsiders, it might have seemed like the end of the story, but Elijah's family knew otherwise. Independent investigators and journalists started digging. They discovered inconsistencies in the reports. The body cam footage showed Elijah repeatedly saying he couldn't breathe, Officers' reports described him as resisting without specifying how, or showing evidence of injury to officers. Paramedics' documentation claimed Elijah was violently agitated, yet video evidence suggested he was trembling, weak, and scared. The dosage of ketamine administered exceeded recommended guidelines for someone of his weight. These inconsistencies raise a chilling question. Was this a case of medical neglect, police misconduct, or a fatal combination of both? Elijah McClain's story quickly became emblematic of a larger pattern. Many Americans began to recognize the tragic similarities to other cases. Black men, young and non-threatening, meeting deadly force in encounters with law enforcement. Social media commentators highlighted the racial dynamics. Elijah's mask, his quiet demeanor, his gentle nature, all characteristics that should have made him unthreatening, were interpreted as suspicious. The bias was subtle but deadly. It wasn't just a chokehold or the ketamine or the initial 911 call. It was a system that allowed someone like Elijah to be perceived as dangerous simply because of his race, demeanor, and appearance. As months went by, more disturbing details emerged. Officers involved were initially placed on administrative leave, but there were no immediate hearings. The Aurora Police Department defended their actions publicly, citing protocols and excited delirium. Records show that paramedics had been trained to use ketamine for agitated patients, but not specifically in situations where a person was restrained and not resisting. Families and activists began to suspect something deeper. The initial investigation seemed designed to protect officers and paramedics rather than seek justice for Elijah. It wasn't until 2020, amid nationwide protests following the death of George Floyd, that Elijah McClain's name began circulating widely. Social media exploded with his story. Candlelight vigils were held across the country. Videos of his violin performances and testimonials from his friends were shared thousands of times. People asked, how does someone so gentle die this way? How could the system fail him so completely? The public outcry was intense, emotional, and relentless. Activists demanded an independent investigation. They demanded transparency. And for the first time, it seemed the system would be forced to respond. In response to national pressure, Aurora City officials reopened the investigation into Elijah's death. This time, independent investigators reviewed all available evidence: body cam footage, 911 call recordings, paramedic reports, autopsy results. What they found was alarming. It became clear that the original investigation had overlooked or minimized critical evidence. Witnesses who had spoken out about Elijah's calm demeanor were ignored. Medical experts warned that the ketamine dosage was not only inappropriate, but lethal when combined with restraint. Suddenly, what had been considered a tragic accident was now under the lens of potential criminal negligence and misconduct. Through it all, Elijah's family carried the emotional weight of this tragedy. They remembered him not as a sketchy man, not as a statistic, but as a son, brother, musician, and healer. Every news report that suggested he was resisting or agitated felt like a personal attack, an erasure of who he truly was. His mother, grandmother, and friends became tireless advocates. They spoke at vigils, gave interviews, and worked with legal teams to push for accountability. They faced a system that seemed reluctant to acknowledge the full truth of what happened to Elijah. Elijah McClain's story had moved from tragedy to national conversation. But the full truth was still hidden, buried under official statements, conflicting medical reports, and systemic failures. One thing was certain: his gentle spirit had sparked something far bigger than himself. Candlelight vigils, social media campaigns, and protests began turning his death into a symbol of the fight for justice. Yet, for his family, every unanswered question was a wound that would never heal. By 2020, Elijah McClain's death had finally begun to capture national attention. For over a year, his story had been quietly filed away, almost forgotten beyond the borders of Aurora, Colorado. But in the wake of George Floyd's murder, his name resurfaced like a ghost demanding justice. Candlelight vigils were held in his honor. Social media erupted with hashtags like #JusticeForElijah and #Elijah McClain. And people across the nation began to learn about the gentle, soft-spoken man who had been stopped while walking home, only to never make it there alive. The reopening of the investigation brought new scrutiny. Independent investigators pored over every detail. The 911 call, the paramedic reports, the body cam footage, and the autopsy results. They discovered disturbing inconsistencies that had been overlooked in the initial inquiry. The police claimed Elijah had resisted. The paramedics insisted they were following protocol for what they called excited delirium, and yet the body cam showed a different story. A young man trembling, confused, and terrified, pleading with officers and gasping for breath, never lashing out or threatening anyone. The contradictions were stark, unsettling, and deeply troubling. Medical experts weighed in, emphasizing that the ketamine dose Elijah received far exceeded safe limits for someone of his size and weight. Combined with the physical stress of being restrained and the carotid chokehold applied by the officers, the overdose became fatal. His underlying conditions, like anemia and asthma, made him even more vulnerable. It became impossible to ignore the reality. Multiple systems had failed Elijah in a single night, and what was initially dismissed as a tragic accident now appeared as a cascade of negligence and misjudgment. As the story unfolded, the public grew outraged. People mourned not just the loss of Elijah McClain, but the broader injustice his death represented. How could man so gentle, so kind, so harmless be perceived as a threat? Why had the system failed him at every level, from police intervention to emergency medical response? Protests and vigils sprang up, and artists and musicians honored him with performances, often featuring his beloved violin. His story became a symbol, a stark reminder of the dangers that face young black men in everyday encounters with authority. Then came the revelations. Internal reviews showed officers had not followed proper de-escalation protocols, while paramedics had administered a dangerous dosage of ketamine without adequately assessing Elijah's condition. Videos and reports were initially withheld from the public, raising questions about transparency and possible cover-ups. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a horrifying picture, a system that had both physically and procedurally failed a young man whose only crime was existing while black. Elijah's family bore the emotional weight of this tragedy. They remembered him not as a sketchy man, not as a statistic, but as a son, a brother, a musician, a healer. Every word in the official reports that contradicted his gentle nature felt like an insult. His mother, grandmother, and friends became tireless advocates, speaking at vigils, giving interviews, and demanding justice in the face of a system that seemed reluctant to confront its own failures. The case took a legal turn when Aurora agreed to a historic $15 million civil settlement with Elijah's family in 2021, acknowledging the pain and injustice inflicted upon them. The Colorado Attorney General's office also opened a criminal investigation into the officers and paramedics involved. Yet even with these steps, a sense of incompleteness lingered. Justice, delayed and partial, could not bring back a life so abruptly cut short. Elijah's story forces a nation to confront difficult questions. Was his death the result of police brutality, medical neglect, or the intersection of both? How much did implicit bias contribute to perceiving a gentle, soft-spoken black man as dangerous? Could better training, de-escalation, or care save him? These questions have no easy answers, but they demand reflection, discussion, and action. Even in death, Elijah McClain continues to inspire. His love for music, his kindness towards strangers and animals, and his gentle spirit have left an indelible mark on the nation. Vigils continue. Violins play in his honor. And his story fuels a fight for accountability, reform, and the recognition of every life's inherent value. And still, the haunting question remains. If a gentle, unarmed, kind-hearted man like Elijah McClain could be stopped and killed while walking home, how safe is anyone in a system that so often mistakes innocence for danger? His legacy is not only in the music he left behind, but in the urgent call for justice, empathy, and change, a call that cannot and must not be ignored.